Emily never forgot the first time she met Daniel. It was one of those golden, gentle Saturday mornings when sunlight poured through the kitchen windows and everything looked a little kinder than usual. She had spent hours preparing the house, dusting shelves that didn't need dusting, straightening cushions twice, arranging flowers she had bought just that morning. Mark's best friend from college was coming over, and though she wouldn't have admitted it aloud, she wanted everything to look perfect. Mark had told her more about Daniel than about anyone else. Stories from their university days, late-night pizza runs before exams, endless road trips fueled by cheap coffee, and the kind of loyal friendship that came only from shared youth and survival through bad decisions. For years, Daniel had existed in her life as a collection of anecdotes and laughter filtered through Mark's voice, until the doorbell rang. Emily opened the door and found him standing there holding a small box wrapped in brown paper. "Housewarming gift," he said with an easy smile. Inside were delicate wine glasses that glimmered in the morning light. He looked casually put together, jeans, clean shirt, hair slightly disheveled as if he'd just come from a breeze, and his expression was open, kind. The moment their eyes met, something subtle shifted inside Emily. Not fireworks, not some cinematic rush, but a quiet ripple. An awareness, alive, strange, undeniable. "Emily, finally," he said as he stepped in, extending his hand. "I've heard so much about you." His handshake was warm, confident. His voice had that calm steadiness that could make even ordinary words sound significant. It lingered in her ears a second too long. Before she could form a proper reply, Mark appeared from the kitchen, grinning wide. "Danny, about time," he said, pulling him into a hug hard enough to make Daniel laugh. The men fell into the rhythm of old friendship immediately, easy and unforced. Emily stood back, half smiling, watching. She liked seeing Mark like this, carefree, loud with laughter, his happiness echoing through the house. But as she watched, she found herself noticing Daniel more than she expected to, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the effortless confidence in his movements. He wasn't what one would call traditionally handsome, but there was something magnetic, something in his quiet self-assurance that filled the space around him. When his gaze flickered toward her in between conversations, it wasn't a mere glance. It was as if, for a heartbeat, he saw her. Not Mark's wife, not the hostess, just Emily. At dinner, the three of them sat around the table. The air hummed with conversation and clinking cutlery. Daniel talked about his work, architecture projects that took him from city to city, nights spent sketching blueprints, and dawns watching skylines change. His voice made everything sound possible, full of movement and possibility. Emily rested her chin on her palm, listening, utterly drawn in. "Careful, Em," Mark teased, elbowing her lightly. "You'll start liking his stories more than mine." She laughed, rolling her eyes. But inside, something stirred uneasily. Because for a brief moment, she had been watching Daniel not out of politeness, but out of fascination. Later, as the evening mellowed, she stood at the kitchen sink rinsing dishes, her thoughts still looping around bits of conversation. The sound of footsteps made her glance up. Daniel was leaning against the doorway, smiling faintly. "Let me give you a hand," he said, stepping closer. She shook her head quickly. No, you're the guest. Sit. Enjoy yourself." He didn't insist, just smiled in that quiet, knowing way. Their fingers grazed as he reached for a plate, and the contact was brief, but it left a spark behind, a faint but unmistakable pulse. She looked away, her cheeks warming. When Daniel finally left that night, the house felt too still. She slipped into bed beside Mark, who was already asleep, one arm draped across her hips. She watched the ceiling, replaying the evening. Daniel's laughter, his gestures, his voice. She loved Mark, she reminded herself firmly. She did. But the small, dangerous flicker she'd felt throughout dinner hadn't disappeared. It had settled somewhere quiet, smoldering where she couldn't reach it. In the weeks that followed, Daniel became a fixture in their lives. He dropped by on weekends for football games, helped Mark patch the fence, joined family dinners as naturally as if he belonged there. To outsiders, he was simply the loyal friend, reliable, easy company. To Emily, he was a quiet storm she couldn't name. She began to notice him unconsciously. The way he leaned forward when he listened as if every word mattered. The way he remembered offhand comments she'd made days earlier. The rare moments when, without saying anything, he seemed to understand exactly what she meant. It wasn't that he flirted. He didn't. He was respectful, careful. But even restraint could hum with an unspoken current. Then one afternoon, when Mark was out running errands, Daniel appeared at the door holding a toolbox. "Mark asked me to return this," he explained with an easy smile. For a second, Emily hesitated before opening the door wider. "He's not here," she said, her voice coming out quicker than intended. "I know," Daniel replied simply. "He mentioned you might need it, so I figured I'd drop it off. Just an errand. Nothing unusual." And yet, standing in the doorway, the afternoon light haloed behind him, there was that same tug in her chest. She wanted to ask him in, offer him coffee, continue some harmless conversation, but she didn't. Something deep inside whispered, "Don't cross that line." "Thank you," she said, managing a polite smile. "I'll make sure he gets it." He nodded, lingering one beat longer than necessary before turning away. She watched him go until he disappeared down the path. The sound of the door closing echoing in an empty house that suddenly felt smaller. She stood there for a long moment, her back against the door, heart pounding as though she'd narrowly escaped something she couldn't quite name. That was when the truth began to settle in. She was in trouble. Not because anything had happened, but because everything could. So she started building quiet boundaries, polite distance, shorter conversations, the safety of pretended indifference. She reminded herself, Daniel was Mark's best friend. Mark's, not hers, not ever hers. And yet some threads once pulled can't be neatly tied back. His smile lingered in her mind on ordinary afternoons. The tone of his voice drifted through her memory when she least wanted it to. She even caught herself anticipating his next visit, only to feel guilt rush in immediately after. That night, sitting beside Mark on the couch as they watched television, she forced her laughter, making sure it sounded light, casual, practiced. But beneath the surface of every grin was the memory of brown eyes meeting hers across a kitchen, of fingertips brushing, of something unspoken thrumming quietly between them. Emily knew, even then, that something had begun the moment she opened the door to Daniel. Something forbidden, wordless, but unmistakably alive. It didn't need to be confessed aloud to exist. It was simply there, a spark waiting, patient, quiet, almost tender in its danger. Daniel soon became almost part of their household. He blended into their routines with a familiarity that should have been harmless. Sunday dinners, last-minute game nights, house repairs. It all felt normal, expected. To everyone else, he was just the friend who never quite left. To Emily, he had become the quiet reminder of a version of herself she thought had long disappeared. A woman who could still be noticed, still be seen. Every time the door opened to reveal him, her pulse betrayed her. She forced herself to behave as though nothing had changed, though deep down, it had. And even as she promised herself she would draw a line that could never be crossed, she felt the thread between them tug tighter with every passing day. Then came that rainy evening when Mark called to say he'd be late. The house felt strangely hollow without him, the rhythm of rain against glass steady and low. Emily wrapped herself in a sweater and made coffee, the smell filling the air with faint warmth. That knock at the door startled her, and there he was again, damp hair, toolbox in hand. "Mark asked me to fix that shelf in the kitchen," Daniel said, shaking the rain from his sleeves. "Come in," she replied before she had time to think. "That shelf's been ready to fall for weeks." Together they worked in silence, broken by small, easy exchanges. She held the flashlight while he crouched to secure the bolts, their fingers brushing each time she passed him a screw. Each touch made something rush through her chest like electric current. When he finished, he straightened, wiping his hands. "That should hold for a good while," he said, his grin boyish. "Thank you," she murmured. "You didn't have to come all the way through the rain." "I didn't mind." He stayed, just a bit longer than necessary. Soon they were seated at the table, 2 cups of coffee steaming between them, the sound of the rain soft against the window panes. The atmosphere had changed, no longer casual, no longer routine. The quiet between them wasn't empty. It was full. Heavy with things neither would dare to speak. They began with laughter. Funny stories from college, harmless teasing. But gradually, the words deepened. Daniel's questions turned personal, like gentle knocks on a door she wasn't sure she should open. "What about you, Emily?" he asked, his voice soft. "What dreams did you have before all this? Before the house? Before the marriage?" She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "I don't even remember anymore." He studied her quietly, eyes warm but searching. "Maybe it's time you did." Differently than she expected? Emily found herself answering honestly, more honestly than she had in years. She admitted she once dreamed of traveling, more, of writing, of chasing passions that had been put aside when marriage and responsibilities took over. Daniel listened intently, nodding, encouraging her with every word. His attention made her feel seen, not just as a wife or hostess, but as a woman with hopes and disappointments. With dreams still flickering in the background, at one point, she laughed nervously. "I don't usually say these things out loud." "You should," Daniel replied softly. "You have so much inside you, Emily, more than you give yourself credit for." The sincerity in his voice startled her. For a long moment, their yes held, and she felt something heavy settled between them. Unspoken truth. Neither dared acknowledge when their hands brushed as they reached for the same mug. The silence that followed was louder than any words. Emily pulled her hand back quickly, her heart thudding in her chest. She stood abruptly, walking to the counter under the pretense of refilling the coffee. She needed space, distance, anything to quiet the storm inside her. Daniel stayed seated, watching her quietly as if he too was struggling with something he couldn't say. Eventually, the moment passed. They changed the subject, moved back to lighter conversation, but the undercurrent remained. Emily felt it in every pause, every glance that lasted too long. She knew she was walking a dangerous line. And yet, she couldn't deny how alive she felt in Daniel's company. Later that night, after Daniel finally left, Emily sat alone at the table, staring at the empty mugs. The house was silent, except for the rain, but her heart was still pounding with everything left unsaid. She told herself it was harmless, just conversation, just friendship, nothing more. But deep down, she knew it wasn't true. Days turned into weeks, and the feeling only grew stronger. Whenever Daniel came over, Emily tried to act normal, tried to focus on Mark and their shared routines. But she couldn't escape the invisible thread pulling her toward Daniel. She caught him watching her sometimes, his gaze lingering just a little too long before he looked away. She knew he felt it too, even if neither of them dared to admit it. One evening at a small neighborhood gathering, Mark and Daniel were standing outside with a group of friends, laughing over an old story. Emily was inside preparing more drinks. When Daniel walked in, Elenito grabbed something from the counter. For a brief second, they were the only two in the room. Their eyes met. Nothing was said, but everything was understood. Daniel picked up the drinks and smiled faintly. But there was something behind that smileless softness, a question that neither of them could answer. Then he walked back outside, leaving Emily standing frozen. Her heart caught between loyalty and longing. That night, lying in bed next to Mark, Emily stared into the darkness. She told herself again that she loved her husband, that Daniel was only a friend, that the feelings stirring inside her were dangerous and must be buried. But the truth was undeniable. Something had begun the moment she sat across from Daniel, with rain tapping at the windows. Something that neither of them had asked for, but both of them felt, and Emily knew deep down. That life in her home would never feel the same again. Summer came, and with it came long evenings filled with neighborhood barbecues, laughter spilling from backyards, and the warmth of friendships that seemed unshockable. To anyone looking in, Emily's life was perfect. She had a kind husband, a stable home, and friends who surrounded her like family. Yet, beneath her calm smile, she carried a storm she could not share with anyone. Her heart betrayed her each time Daniel walked into the room. She had tried to push the feelings away, bury them under duty and love for her husband, but they only grew stronger. The way Daniel's laughter filled the space, the way his eyes seemed to hold hers longer than they should, made her feel both alive and guilty at the same time at the summer barbecue. Mark stood by the grill chatting with neighbors, his laughter booming across the yard. Emily was inside the house preparing bowls of salad. She glanced out the window and saw Daniel in the yard tossing a ball-toe group of kids. His movements were effortless, his laughter genuine, and the joy on his face lit something deep inside her chest. She caught herself smiling, her hand lingering on the spoon she was holding. For a fleeting second, she forgot everything. Her marriage, her responsibilities, the danger of what she felt. It was only when her reflection in the window reminded her of herself, Mark's wife, that she pulled her gaze away. Later that night, after the guests had left and the backyard was quiet, Emily stayed behind to help clean up. She stacked plates, carried trays inside, and hummed softly to fill the silence. When she turned, Daniel was there holding a stack of glasses. "Need help?" he asked, his voice low. "Gentle, Dot." She tried to smile. "You've already done enough. You should go rest." Tea didn't leave. He set the glasses down and picked up a rag to dry dishes. They worked side by side, the air heavy with words unsaid. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "Emily." His voice was softer now, hesitant. "Sometimes I wonder if we'd met first in another time, another life. Would things have been different?" Her hand froze around the dish she was holding. The question hit her harder than she expected. She looked at him, searching his face for some sign that he was joking, but his eyes held only sincerity. It's the same quiet longing she had felt inside herself for months. Her heart screamed to answer him. To say yes, things would have been different. "Yes, I feel it too." But instead, she forced a small smile and whispered, "I shouldn't ask questions like that." The words felt like knives in her throat. Daniel nodded slowly, his expression unreadable, but the look in his eyes lingered, carrying more weight than any confession could. He finished drying the glass, set it down carefully, and stepped back. The silence between them grew louder than the laughter that had filled the house hours earlier. Emily wanted to break it, to explain, to soften the edge of her answer, but she couldn't. She had chosen her words, and with them, she had built a wall neither of them dared to cross. Mark walked in just then, cheerful and oblivious, thanking Daniel for staying to help. Daniel smiled, masking everything in a single nod, and left soon after. That night, Emily lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling while Mark slept peacefully beside her. She replayed Daniel's words again and again, each repetition twisting deeper into her chest. Would things have been different? She whispered into the darkness. Each of knowing the answer and never being able to say it was almost unbearable in the days that followed. Emily tried harder than ever to act normal. She cooked dinners, laughed at Mark's jokes, and kept her hands busy with small chores. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't silence the echo of Daniel's question. Every time he came over, she noticed the distance he kept. He still smiled, still spoke kindly, but there was a restraint in his manner now, as if he too had built a wall around himself. And yet the unspoken bond between them only grew stronger in that silence. One afternoon, Mark had to work late again, and Daniel stopped by to return a borrowed ladder. Emily opened the door, her heart skipping despite herself. He stood there, the ladder balanced in his hands. Expression calm. They exchanged small talk polite and careful. But beneath every word lay the memory of that night in the kitchen. Emily felt it pressing down on her. the truth neither of them could acknowledge. When Daniel finally left, Emily closed the door and leaned against it, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. She knew then that she had reached a point of no return. She could never confess what she felt, but she also knew she could never erase it. The heart is not loyal to reason. It does not choose wisely, nor does it always honor her vows. Emily's heart had betrayed her even as she clung to her marriage with steady hands. She loved her husband, yes, but in the quiet corners of her soul, there was another truth she could not deny. She had fallen for Daniel that night. As she watched Mark fall asleep, she realized that love can be complicated. It isn't always honesty, one person, one path. Sometimes love takes root where it shouldn't. Sometimes it lives in silence, in stolen glances, in the questions that will never be answered. Emily turned to the window, looking out at the stars, and whispered to herself the words she would never say aloud if things had been different. Daniel, it would have been you, but things weren't different, and she knew they never could be. Years slipped by like pages turning in a book. Emily and Mark's marriage continued, steady, dependable, built on routines that rarely changed. Birthdays, anniversaries, vacations, and countless quiet evenings came and went. From the outside, their life looked whole. But inside Emily's heart, there lived a secret she had carried for so long, it had become part of her. Daniel remained close. Always a presence at family gatherings, always at Mark's side, always part of the circle. He never overstepped, never gave reason for suspicion. He was the loyal friend, the man who showed up when needed, the one who blended so easily into their lives. And yet, every time his eyes met, Emily's, she felt the weight of everything unspoken. She learned to live with it. Some days it was easier, almost forgotten, like a faint scar you don't notice until the light hits it just right. Other days it was unbearable, adult egg that reminded her of what could never be. She buried her feelings deep, told herself they were harmless, told herself she was strong enough to carry them in silence. But silence is heavy and it never truly disappears. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Mark threw a small celebration at their home. Friends and family filled the rooms, laughter rising in waves, glasses clinking in toasts. Emily moved through the crowd gracefully, smiling, thanking guests, keeping the night alive with warmth. She wore the dress Mark had bought her, soft blue that shimmered under the lights. As the evening carried on, her eyes drifted across the room. Man, there he was, Daniel standing quietly near the back, a glass in hand, his expression calm, but his gaze steady. When their eyes met, Emily felt that same pull she'd felt years ago, the first time she opened the door to him. Nothing had changed. Not really. She excused herself from the group around her and walked toward the kitchen to catch her breath. A moment later, Daniel followed, setting his glass on the counter. They stood together in the soft light. The hum of voices from the other room muffled like distant music. "Congratulations," he said gently. His voice was warm, but there was something in it. Something tender. Something restrained. "Thank you," Emily replied, her hands fidgeting with the edge of the counter. She wanted to say more, wanted to ask him why he looked at her that way, wanted to tell him what lived in her heart, but she didn't. She couldn't. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of years pressing down between them. Daniel finally smiled, that small, familiar smile that had always undone her. "You've built a good life, Emily. You should be proud." Her throat tightened. "Yes," she whispered. Though the word felt fragile, the sounds of laughter pulled them back, and Daniel picked up his glass again. He nodded once, a silent goodbye, and walked out of the kitchen, blending into the crowd. Emily stayed behind for a moment, studying herself before returning to her role as hostess, wife, partner. That night, when the house was quiet and the guests were gone, Emily sat alone by the window while Mark tidied up the last of the dishes. She watched the stars, the same stars she'd whispered her secrets 2 years ago, and thought about the life she had lived. It wasn't bad. It was stable, kind, filled with moments of comfort. But in her heart, she knew there had been another path, one that would never be walked. Daniel had been the love that was never hers, not because he didn't feel it. She knew he did, but because some loves are bound by circumstance, by loyalty, by choices made long before the heart ever realized what it wanted. Over the years, Emily came to understand that not every love story is meant to be lived out loud. Some exist quietly, shaping the soul insolence. Some live in the spaces between words, in the glances across a crowded room, in the way two hands almost touch but never do. She carried Daniel in her heart, not as a betrayal, but as a truth she could never share. And though it hurt, it also gave her something proof that she could still feel deeply. That love could surprise her even when it was impossible. As the years passed, Emily grew older, her hair silvering, her steps slowing. Mark remained beside her, steady as ever. And Daniel was still there too. Always nearby, always just close enough to remind her of what she once longed for. On quiet nights, when Emily looked back on her life, she realized that love comes in many forms. Some loves you marry, some loves you lose, and some loves you carry quietly forever, even if they were never truly yours. And Daniel was that love, the love that had never been hers, but it changed her life all the same.